All right. Well, thank you for coming, everybody. Before I forget, all cell phones on stun. Okay, just to make sure that we got them turned off. I know we tend to forget, and we'd like to just make sure that we don't have a disruption. I want to introduce our speaker for this evening is Mr. Doug Williams, President, Chief Executive Officer, and Director of Atlantic Capital Bank, a holding company in Atlantic Capital Bankshares Incorporated. July 2003 until March 2006, Mr. Williams was Managing Director and Head of Wachovia Corporation's International Corporate Finance Group, with responsibility for Wachovia's investment banking and corporate finance activities in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. After the merger of Wachovia and First Union in 2001, and until July of 2003, he was Executive Vice President and Head of the Global Corporate Banking Division. The Global Corporate Banking Division was comprised of over 300 banking professionals who managed corporate banking relationships within 12 specialized industry groups and 4 global regions. Mr. Williams was Executive Vice President and Head of Wachovia's U.S. Corporate Banking Division from 1997 to 1999. He was elected to Senior Vice President and Group Executive in 1995, with responsibility for business in the Western and Midwestern states. At Wachovia, Mr. Williams was Chief Risk Officer for all corporate, institutional, and wholesale banking activities from 2000 until the merger with First Union in late 2001. Mr. Williams has served on the boards of the ABA Securities Association, the Visiting Nurse Association of Metropolitan Atlanta, and the Global Business Roundtable at the Robinson College of Business at Georgia State University. He is a committee member of Young Life Northwest Atlanta services on the boards of Metro Atlanta Chamber of Commerce and Georgia Chamber of Commerce, Metro Atlanta, YMCA, and Whitefield Academy, and is also an advisory member of the Administrative Committee of the Presbyterian Church in America. He is also a member of the Buckhead Coalition. Mr. Williams graduated with honors from Auburn University with a BS in Finance and has completed management development programs at Colgate Darden School of Business at the University of Virginia and at the Fuqua School of Business at Duke University. So let's give a nice hand applause for Mr. Williams. Thank you, Doug. Here's your clicker.
Thank you very much, John. It's a pleasure to be with you all. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me in the back of the room? What I want to do tonight is share the Atlantic Capital story with you. This is a story of a new business venture, 3.5 years old, and hopefully you can learn from my experience and perhaps be inspired to think about starting a business at some point in the future yourself. I wanted to start by telling you that my wife and I have 3 daughters, 2 of whom are recent graduates of Auburn University, class of 2009 and 2010, and then our youngest is a freshman at Auburn. But our number 2 daughter, who graduated in 2010, had an interesting commencement speaker, and that speaker was Tim Cook, the Chief Operating Officer of Apple Computer. Tim is an Auburn graduate, class of 1981, a year behind me. And he talked about the importance of taking risk in your career. He was a senior executive at IBM and subsequently at Compaq Computer, and was offered an opportunity to go to Apple at a time when the company its future was very much in doubt. This was before the iPod, before the iPhone, before the iPad. But for some intuitive reason, he thought this was an interesting opportunity, and he was willing to take the risk of leaving an established organization where he was having a lot of career success for one where the future of the company was very much in question, and there were questions about whether or not his skills could be applied in that situation. And his message to the students was, don't underestimate the importance of intuition. Don't underestimate the opportunity to take risk in your career for new opportunity, for new returns and new opportunity. And I want to tell you that that's very much what I did after a 26-year career at Wachovia. I left a very secure situation where I had had a good bit of success for one where there was a good bit of uncertainty, but lots of upside. But I had this intuition, this thought that there was a real opportunity to do something different and have a lot more fun in my career. And now I don't want to compare myself to Tim Cook or Atlantic Capital to Apple Computer. We're a long way from that. But the motivations were much the same. And I think as you think about your career, you'll find these kind of opportunities along the way. Some opportunity to do something that maybe doesn't make a lot of sense logically, but for some intuitive reason, you're willing to take the risk, and the upside is very substantial in doing that. So let's talk about Atlantic Capital. We were established in May of 2007 to serve small to mid-sized corporations. We focus on corporations with revenues of $5 to $250 million. We focus on institutional caliber commercial real estate developers and investors active in office, retail, industrial, and multifamily for rent property types. We focus on financial institutions and not-for-profit organizations. Our other main business is a private client business where we focus on professionals and their firms, the principals and executives of our commercial clients, and affluent families. Atlantic Capital has 371 shareholders. 50% of our shares are held by individuals, most of whom are Atlanta area residents, and 50% by institutions, primarily 3 private equity funds. We initially raised $125 million. We were the largest initial equity capital raise for a new independent bank in U.S. history. And our mission is to earn a premium valuation for our shareholders with strong earnings growth and a fortress balance sheet by building a leading southeastern bank sharply focused on small to mid-sized private enterprises. Why did we do this? Well, in the summer of 2005, I saw an article in the Wall Street Journal. Talked about a bank in Houston, Texas that was for sale. It was subsequently called Amegy Bank Corp. It was subsequently sold to Zions Bank, which is a Salt Lake City, Utah-based organization. And this bank was about a $7 billion institution. It was 12 years old, had mostly a commercial market focus, and it was active in Houston and other major metropolitan areas in Texas. And in doing a little research on that organization, I realized there were 2 or 3 other companies in Texas that looked very similar. They were $3 to $7 billion in assets. They were anywhere from 8 to 12 years old. They had mostly a commercial market focus, and they were centered in major metropolitan markets in Texas. And I started thinking, well, what about the competitive environment, the competitive landscape gave rise to those institutions, and is there any comparable opportunity in the Southeast? And the more I thought about it, I thought there was an opportunity because of the structure of the industry, of our banking industry, and also the specific opportunity in the Southeast. So let's talk about this for a minute. In 2005, there was a barbell-shaped industry in banking. We had a lot of very small community banks and a number of large regional, national, and global players. And in fact, the assets in the banking industry are controlled by about 10, maybe 75% of the assets in banking are controlled by 10 organizations at the top of the scale. So this spectrum where there are a lot of small institutions, a handful of large institutions, but those large institutions control the banking industry in a lot of ways. And then there were some specialized business models, some companies that focused on wealth management or trust, mortgages, credit cards, and business or corporate banking. And each one of these types of institutions had some distinct advantages and disadvantages. The large regional, national, global players benefited from their scale, their broad geography, a diverse business mix, but they had some substantial disadvantages too. Because of their need for efficiency, they were driven by standardization and uniformity, which created a competitive opportunity for others. They suffer from constant discontinuity. They're always changing strategies. They're always changing people. They're always changing areas of emphasis, and that's very confusing to their customers. And then because they're driven by standardization and uniformity, because of this constant discontinuity, they really don't score very well in customer service. Community banks, on the other hand, get very high marks for service because they have small organizations, they're very nimble, they're close to their customers, they listen and they pay attention, and they deliver very good customer service in a highly personalized way. But they have some significant disadvantages as well. They have limited geographic focus, their business mix is undiversified, and they're typically undercapitalized and underskilled. So there's some distinct advantages and disadvantages at each end of the spectrum. On the other hand, these companies with specialized business models typically have very focused strategies and a limited business mix, both a plus and a minus. They are typically experts in their chosen segments or service capabilities, which is a strength. They typically have very high customer satisfaction because of that expertise, and they are often capitalized to fit their strategy. So the specialized business models seem to have some appeal, and there also seem to be some opportunities somewhere between these community banks and these large national and global players. And the question we had, was there a way to use a specialized business model but have the advantages of a community bank and, and navigate around the disadvantages of the large players? We decided there were, and I'll tell you more about that in a minute. The other aspect of the opportunity was the southeastern opportunity. We did see the barbell-shaped competitive landscape in the southeast, just as we saw in the nation as a whole. It was clear that the smaller regional and super community banks were focused primarily on consumer and real estate business. There were few mid-sized institutions that were focused on business or corporate banking. There was a lot of banking talent in the southeast that was often dissatisfied. And we had a very attractive single metropolitan market in the southeast, Atlanta, which is 3 to 4 times the next largest southeastern market outside of South Florida. If you look at the major metropolitan areas in North Carolina or Tennessee or Alabama or northern Florida, Atlanta is going to be 3 to 4 times the size of those opportunities, those markets. In particular, Atlanta, we'll wait for this to come up. There you go. Atlanta is the 9th largest metropolitan statistical area in the U.S. It has a population that is younger than the nation as a whole and other large metropolitan areas. It is more highly educated, and it's more affluent than U.S. averages. It's the 6th fastest growing large metropolitan area in the U.S. Its household income is the 10th fastest growing large market in the U.S., and it has a very large universe of mid-sized companies. In fact, there are over 5,000 companies in this $5 million to $250 million revenue range in the Atlanta metropolitan area. So this is a very rich market area. So our thesis was that we could combine high-touch customer service, we could gather sufficient capital, we could assemble superior talent, and we could create value by producing earnings growth and the reliability of a strong balance sheet. In particular, when we talk about high-touch customer service, we really saw an opportunity that was based on technology as much as anything else. There are available in the market advanced technologies to produce competitive capabilities in our business that really give us an edge over the large established banks that are bound by legacy technology systems. We also thought that this high-touch customer service could be built on bankers that were very seasoned, that had a lot of experience, and therefore had real expertise in the business. And because we would be a small organization, we thought that we would have the advantages of knowing our clients, being able to listen to them, and provide personalized service. In terms of gathering sufficient capital, that was important because we wanted to have the credit capacity to serve these mid-sized enterprises, provide the loan needs that they had, typically needing loans of anywhere from $1 million up to $15 million or so. As I said earlier, there was a lot of talent available, principally at large banks in major metropolitan areas across the Southeast. We also thought that the challenge of creating a large new banking organization from scratch would attract people, and that has been the case. And then we thought that we could attract them by giving them equity upside in their compensation, which we've done. So we decided to do this. We began our business planning in 2005, the fall of 2005. It really continued, this organizational phase continued until mid-2007. And there were four key components to the organizational phase. One was business planning. We had to determine what our strategy would be. We had to determine how much capital we were going to raise and what the ownership profile of that capital would be. We had to design our organization and determine what the staffing would be. We had to determine what our technology needs were and what kind of operating platform we were going to build. And we had to plan for regulatory approvals. Well, in terms of staffing, we decided to recruit mid-career bankers at large banks who had grown weary of working for large companies and really wanted to be able to do what they did unfettered by the complications of a large organization. We were able to attract bankers that on average have about 20 years of experience, and they really saw Atlantic Capital as an opportunity to practice their craft in a very focused way. We also determined that it's in attracting that type of talent, it was important to ask many of those bankers to become our initial shareholders, and we have a large proportion of our staff that owns our stock. We also gave many of them stock options and equity upside opportunity in their compensation so they would think like owners and be motivated to earn a return for our shareholders. And then in terms of regulatory approvals, we had to determine, did we want to pursue a state charter or a federal charter? Did we want to have a holding company that would own the bank? And we also had to grapple with the prospect of substantial conditions on any approval we would get from banking regulators because we were a new bank. We decided to pursue a state charter rather than a national charter. Our primary regulator is the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance. We did decide to establish a bank holding company that owns the bank. It's regulated by the Federal Reserve. And then we realized that we would have these conditions as a new bank. The FDIC, which is our primary federal regulator, and when we started in business, had a 3-year period of enhanced supervisory scrutiny, and that's since been expanded to 7 years because of the problems in the industry. So we get a lot of scrutiny from our regulators. The Federal Reserve has a 5-year period of intense supervision for new banks as well. So that's from August of 2005 to May of 2007. That's what we were doing. I left Wachovia in March of 2006 to work on the project full time, and it was a full-time job to get this thing off the ground. So we opened for business in May of 2007. We realized that first stub year would be a period of time where it was all about getting up and running and organizing the business after receiving regulatory approvals and getting our capital raised in the spring of 2007. The business environment, when we started in business, we were on the tail end of what was the second longest economic expansion in the post-World War II era. We were starting to see some early signs of excess, certainly no indication that we were going to go through a very deep recession, but we were beginning to see some signs of excess in the housing sector of the economy. The business was highly competitive, and it's important to note that interest rates were, for instance, 30-day 1-month LIBOR, the London Interbank Offered Rate, was about 5.25. That's important when you think about the the degree to which these rates have declined and has a major impact on our earnings opportunity. So at this stage, we're really focused on implementing our technology and operating platform, beginning to build credibility and presence in the market, beginning to leverage our infrastructure. We spent a lot of money to start with. We hired a lot of people. We bought computers. We leased office space. And we needed to start to get some revenue to cover that expense. And probably most importantly, but easy to underestimate, was beginning to build a culture, an Atlantic Capital way of doing things. We hired mid-career professionals from multiple organizations, and they really had to learn to do things our way. And we really had to determine what that way was. One of my colleagues referred to it as building an airplane in flight. It was a very complex thing to do. As we looked out over the first 3 years of our business, we had priorities that were very similar to those that we had for the first year, and that was to continue to assemble our team, a team of superior bankers with lots of experience that would really differentiate themselves on the street in our business, to continue to build our infrastructure and capabilities, to establish and expand our market presence, develop a fortress balance sheet. And by a fortress balance sheet, I mean that's a balance sheet that's able to withstand hits and attacks. And given the economic environment that subsequently developed, it was very important to have a lot of capital, to have a lot of liquidity, to have superior credit quality, and the ability to attract new capital. And we started out with a lot of capital, but we had to build on that, and I think we did that very successfully. And then, of course, to reach profitability. Our original plan was to become profitable in our third year. We were profitable in our third year, but we realized there would be a build up to that. And of course, we had no idea we would have to do that in a very challenging economic environment, an economic environment more challenging than any in my 30-year career. Right off the bat, I said we encountered some significant headwinds in the economy. We opened for business in May of 2007. In July, we started to hear about some problems with some Bear Stearns sponsored hedge funds. And the economy continued to show signs of weakness. And then, of course, in 2008, we had some very significant upheavals in financial markets. In the spring of 2008, we saw Bear Stearns and Washington Mutual fail, or almost fail, and were taken over by larger institutions, Bear Stearns by JP Morgan and Washington Mutual by JP Morgan as well. By the fall of 2008, the global financial system was on the brink of collapse. There were many large institutions that were very close to failure, and governments and central banks around the world had to resort to extraordinary measures to keep the global financial system afloat. Over the course of about 18 months, we saw a 500 basis point or 5% decline in interest rates. And again, when we opened for business, short-term interest rates were 5.25 or so. Today, short-term interest rates are less than a quarter. If you think about the fact that we raised initially over $100 million, just investing that $100 million at 5% was worth $5 million to us. Rates decline by 500 basis points, we lose that $5 million earnings opportunity. So very dramatic, adverse development right off the bat. As you know, we've seen a record number of Georgia bank failures. It's now 57. We had 2 banks fail over last Friday. There have been more bank failures in Georgia than any state in the United States. There are a number of reasons for that. We can talk about that later if you'd like to. But a very adverse environment for starting a new business of any kind, but obviously a very adverse environment for starting a bank. And then since mid-2009, we've statistically seen a recovery in the economy, but it's been a very weak recovery. If you look at post-World War II economic recoveries, this one has been very weak. It's been a jobless recovery. And it's been a very difficult one in which to build a business like ours. We've seen weak loan demand. We've seen continued deleveraging in the economy. And while their optimism is increasing, psychology is generally improving, particularly in the Atlanta area. We don't expect to see meaningful recovery in the economy or meaningful expansion of the economy for 2 or 3 years. The causes of the Great Recession are many, but the first thing we saw was this bubble in housing. And we began to see excesses before we started for business. One of the key decisions that we made was not to get involved in the mortgage business and not to get involved in the acquisition, development, and construction lending business on the residential side. That was just a really important strategic decision that we made. Sometimes it's more important the things you don't do than the things you choose to do. And that proved to be a very wise decision. I'm not going to tell you that we understood the depth of the problem that was out there, but we began to see some signs of excess, and we said we're not going to be in the mortgage business and we're not going to be in the residential construction lending business. Through the financial market crisis of 2008 and all the bank failures, we felt it was very important to adjust our strategy to reflect the environment that we were doing business in. We started out with very aggressive growth aspirations. We began to dial those back. We became much more selective in our credit decision making, in our client selection. We decided we would keep a lot more liquidity on our balance sheet to suffer exogenous shocks that we might encounter. And we thought it was very important to think about how we were going to differentiate our organization in this very challenging environment. People were scared of banks. There was a rising level of distrust in the banking system. You couldn't turn on your TV without hearing about another bank failure or being confronted with new challenges in the financial market. So what would we do to differentiate our organization, let people know that we were a safe company and a good place to do business? Well, we became very focused on articulating the ways that we were going to manage our company differently than others. We were going to have a lot of liquidity. We were going to be very selective in our credit decision making. We were going to have a lot of capital. And I wrote letters to our shareholders. I wrote letters to our customers talking about the ways that we were going to manage our business differently. And we were able to differentiate ourselves as a very strong organization. And if you look at our press clippings through 2008, 2009, they all talk about how well capitalized we are and about what good asset quality we have and all these sorts of things. So I think we were successful. And while depositors were fleeing large banks and fleeing banks that had a reputation for being troubled, we were benefiting from a flight to quality. We were adding depositors, we were adding clients, while they were running from other organizations. So I think we were successful doing that. And then we realized that we needed to continue to build our business and grow our business despite a very challenging economic environment. And we were able to do that. Well, we reached profitability last year. We made money in our third year of business as we anticipated. We actually reported net income of $12.7 million. $3.4 million of that was operating income. We received a tax benefit from prior losses of $9.3 million, which is new capital essentially. So it was a very successful year, and we did that despite what continued to be a very challenging economic environment, a weak recovery, very weak loan demand, particularly in the commercial and industrial sector. But we produced that kind of profit by having very good credit quality. We've had very modest credit losses to date. We've managed our operating expenses very tightly, and we've been able to build non-interest income in the form of foreign exchange fees, interest rate swap fees, and the like. And so we've built a good trajectory of earnings. On an operating basis, we had about a $12 million swing from a loss in 2009 to a profit in 2010. So very good performance. And we began to see some maturity in our market presence. We developed an institutional reputation, some institutional credibility that we didn't have when we started. We now have a reputation in the segments that we do business in as a very viable player, a bank with a lot of expertise and capability that is able to address the needs of small to mid-sized companies in a very effective way. So as we look to the future, what are we trying to do? Well, we're trying to build shareholder value, and we realize that we're going to do that by continuing to build our business, by producing a superior rate of earnings growth. We target earnings growth in the 20 to 30% per year range. We also are thoughtful about what we think is the minimum critical mass for our business model. When we started in our business, we thought it was probably to reach an asset size of $1 to $3 billion in 5 years' time. We're at the 3.5-year mark now. We're just under $1 billion in terms of balance sheet size, so we're sort of getting into the low end of that range. But guess what? The world has changed, and I think that minimum critical mass is now probably $3 to $5 billion. And so over the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to need to triple or more our size, and we're going to do that by a combination of strong organic growth and some acquisitions as well, other strategic expansion opportunities. So we are very focused on continuing to build the business in a sound way. 2 ways we grow the business: organic growth, continuing to add clients every day, building the business brick by brick by doing a good job for our clients and building our reputation. And then strategic expansion, which could involve acquisitions of failed banks, acquisitions of comparatively healthy banks in the Atlanta metropolitan area or in other markets around the Southeast. It could also involve de novo or new expansion in additional markets around the Southeast, and we're studying all those opportunities today. So we think we have weathered the crisis. We've gotten our feet under us. We've gotten the business established in a good, solid way, and we're now positioned to continue to execute our business plan and build a meaningful and very substantial banking organization here in Atlanta that serves small to mid-sized corporations, commercial real estate developers and investors, and certain segments of the private client market very effectively and earn a nice return for our shareholders. So this is a story of progress. It's not yet a story of success. We still have that somewhere. That's an elusive goal somewhere over the horizon, but we're making good progress, and we're having a great time doing that. I've got 2 of my colleagues here with me today who are part of that seasoned group of professionals that joined us, that accepted the challenge of building a new business. They're also Clayton State graduates, and they are Demetria January. Please stand up. Demetria is a 2008 graduate of Clayton State. She works in our loan operations area, which is a vital area of day-to-day contact with our clients and delivering good service. And she's done a great job for us with that good education in mind. And Reagan Winter, a 2001 graduate of Clayton State, and Regan is one of our compliance professionals. Our business is heavily regulated, and we have a staff of professionals that ensure that we comply with all the rules and regulations that are applicable to our business, and that's a real challenge. And we've got a great track record of doing that, thanks to Regan's good work. So that's our story. I'd be delighted to answer a lot of questions.
Questions and answers? Well, just questions first, of course.
I'll try to come up with answers, okay?
Yeah, I have answers.
Ed, you got a question for me?
Can you talk about the skill sets you look for in upcoming graduates, particularly in the finance and accounting areas?
Yeah, I really think there are 2 things. Fundamental to success in banking is an ability to communicate, and an ability to communicate in written and in spoken form. So a good, solid liberal arts background is, I think, critical to success in banking or any business. But having said that, you have to have some technical expertise too, and I think accounting and finance is really what we look for in banking. Accounting is the language of business, and and you have to be able to speak that language. Finance is a knowledge set, a skill set that's very important. I was a finance major in college and really began to love this business by what I learned in the university setting. But I think accounting and finance in terms of the technical business education, but a good, solid liberal arts background is important in terms of being able to communicate and relate to people. So, we've hired mid-career professionals, and their career track records have really been, have been differentiated, I think, by their ability to communicate and their ability to get things done in the market. And that ability to communicate has been key. But they wouldn't have gotten those opportunities if they didn't have a technical background in accounting and finance. So now there are exceptions. We have some people that didn't have a business education. They had just a liberal arts education, or people that have maybe a legal background or whatever. But in the main, a good, solid liberal arts education coupled with a business education is really important. So you all are doing the right thing by being business students.
Can you repeat the questions when they do ask them?
I sure will. Ed's question was, what's the right academic background or skill set for success in banking? Yes, ma'am.
I actually have a two-part question.
Okay.
You chose Atlanta, so that, I'm assuming that's your only location in the Southeast?
Yeah, thank you for asking the question of, we chose Atlanta, and it's our only location now. And the reason for that is, something I referred to in my presentation is Atlanta is far and away the largest and the most attractive market in the Southeast. It is 3 to 4 times the size of any other metropolitan market in the Southeast, with the exception of South Florida. South Florida is a different world. We choose not to do business there, but there are other markets in the Southeast. There are other markets in the Southeast that we'd like to do business in over time. The 3 major metropolitan areas in North Carolina, for instance. Nashville is a very attractive market. Birmingham, perhaps. Jacksonville, Orlando, and Tampa Bay. All these are attractive markets that we'd like to be in over time, but Atlanta is several times the size of any of those. So it's really important that we establish ourselves in Atlanta. Now, another part of your question, I may be anticipating part 2. You still get part 2. But we do just have one office. We don't have a big branch network. And the reason for that is we can efficiently deliver our services to our clients electronically. These business clients don't need to come into a banking office. They don't need to come into a branch. We don't do mass market retail business. So really, we can deliver all of our capabilities electronically. And it's most convenient for these companies to do banking business from their desks on their computers. So that's the capability we give them. Second part of your question.
Second part, well, congratulations on making that profit so soon.
Thank you.
3 years, that's pretty good.
Thank you.
The second part of the question was, since you chose Atlanta, and being that it's 57 banks that have closed,
Mm-hmm.
do you have a team in place that is watching those closures and anticipating what your company needs to do or prevent it from happening?
Yeah, there's a lot in that question. The question is, there have been 57 failures in Georgia. What are we doing to prevent that from happening and or to exploit that opportunity? Is that fair? Okay. First of all, what are we doing to prevent that from happening? Well, this is a risky business. And I tell you, I distinctly remember when we were raising capital from individual investors, we had a series of meetings around the state with prospective investors. I would make a presentation on our plans and our business model and so forth, and then take questions. And one of the questions I remember that came up was, how risky is this? And now this was in late 2006, early 2007. There had not been a bank failure in Georgia since the Great Depression. So, we said, look, there hadn't been a bank failure since the Great Depression. This is a heavily regulated business. You've really got to mess up before you run a banking business in the ground. And little did I know that over the next 3 or 4 years that we would see 57 bank failures in Georgia. There are multiple reasons for that, but one of the reasons that so many banks in Georgia have failed is because of excessive concentration in residential real estate lending. And with a housing bubble, we've seen a decline in residential property values. You've seen defaults on mortgages rise. There's really too much housing capacity in the market right now, and it will take several years to absorb that at the current pace of growth in the metropolitan area. But Georgia banks had lent very heavily on residential real estate. In 2006, there were about 350 banks in Georgia. 23% of them were 5 years old or less. A 5-year-old bank is a very vulnerable business, just like any new business would be. So we not only had this concentration in residential real estate that made the industry here very vulnerable, but you had a lot of new institutions that were still very fragile and were typically undercapitalized relative to the problems that developed. And I would argue probably didn't have the skill to deal with the problems that developed as well. So the antidote to that is really to practice good, sound banking principles. And I think we've assembled a team that has great capability and talent. It's very experienced. But one of the things we focus on doing, and frankly we've been able to do probably in a more effective way given the economic environment that we've been operating in, is really focus on building a risk management culture and infrastructure, an ability to recognize and manage risk in an effective way so those things don't happen to us. To not have concentrations in our loan portfolio, decision to stay away from residential construction finance or mortgage finance, really important risk management decisions. And so we're very careful about what we do. At its essence, banking is a risk management exercise, and good bankers are good risk managers. And so we're very focused on being very careful. That is as important. I call that a fortress balance sheet. The result of that is a fortress balance sheet in addition to growth. And so you have to be able to do both. And those two objectives are often in conflict in banking, but the superior performers are able to do both. So far we've been able to do both, but we work very hard at it. The other aspect of what you're asking is there opportunity with 57 bank failures in Georgia? There absolutely is. All this dislocation in the market, a bank fails, the clients are willing to look around for another bank. We've benefited from bank failures. We've seen a lot of business come our way from failed banks or banks that are troubled in some way or another. Once a bank gets in trouble, it's enormously distracting for its management team, and they really lose their ability to serve their customers in an effective way. And the dissatisfaction that comes from that distraction has really created opportunity for us. There's another opportunity that comes with a lot of bank failures, and that's the ability to acquire those institutions with loss-sharing assistance from the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. We've looked at some of those opportunities. We haven't taken advantage of any of them yet, but there'll be more. So we'll keep looking at them. It's a great question.
You mentioned
Diane.
that you worked on the culture.
Yeah.
How did you build the culture, and what kind of culture now? How would you describe the characteristics of it?
Well, what we wanted was a very collaborative culture where we really respected and built on the experiences and skills of this very experienced group of cadre of people. And, I had in my mind what I thought that felt like and looked like. And we recruited specifically for people that seemed to fit that model. But you really don't know what you have until you have it. And you really can't build it until you start doing it. And so it's very much been a day-by-day thing, and it's really been an exercise in getting people on the same page philosophically. How do we think about the business? How do we think about the company we want to build? How do we think about what we do in terms of teamwork? And we just had to sort of sort it out. It's sort of like, I don't know, maybe the best analogy is getting married. When you're recruiting people, you're dating them. And but once you get married, you really find out if you can live together. And you just kind of have to work it out. And we've had to work it out. And when we opened on day one, we had 35 people. Today we have 73. So we sort of gradually added to it. And I think today we've got, Demetria, Regan, you tell me, but I think we've got a team that functions pretty well together. And we've gotten sort of on the same page. We know what our objectives are. We know each other well enough to respect each other's skills and capabilities. We know what we can contribute, and I think it's starting to work pretty well. But that's a never-ending process, I'm convinced. And the culture that you have should really be in my view, a competitive weapon. It's not only making a great place to work, but it's using that for your advantage in the marketplace. And if people are satisfied with where they work, if they like their jobs, they're probably going to take pretty good care of customers. So that's really important, something we've paid a lot of attention to. But I don't know if there's any recipe for it. I just think you have to work at it every day and talk a lot about it. What would you all say? They agree. Okay. Yes, sir.
Your minimum critical mass for business model, as opposed to maximum critical mass, does that have to do with lean model?
It's an interesting question. I think there are economies of scale in this business, and I think there are diseconomies of scale in this business. I think the large national and global players that are our primary competition, because the sophisticated clients we go after have probably exceeded that maximum scale, that maximum critical mass. I was at an institution that doesn't exist anymore. I worked for 26 years at Wachovia. It's now part of Wells Fargo, of course. When I left, we had 120,000 employees spread all over the world. And I was talking to our CEO one day, and we were talking about how big the company had become and how complex it was and difficult to manage. And I said, a town of 120,000 people has a jail. And in a company of 120,000 people spread all over the world, somebody is always doing something wrong. They're straying from the script somehow. And I just think large companies are tough to manage, and it's hard to keep people focused. And when you manage a company like that, your overall focus is on, you have to be efficient to make money. And you do that by doing as many things as you can in a standardized and uniform way. And that is the antithesis of providing good, flexible service to your customers. So I think you could argue that they've exceeded maximum critical mass. Minimum critical mass is really a function of how much capital do you need to be in the business. And in the case of banking, what size loans can you make with that capital? How much risk can you take with that capital? And there are some regulatory minimums that are guidelines for that. But really, our challenge was appropriately capitalizing the business for the scale we wanted to have over time. And so we raised $125 million, more than any new bank had raised in U.S. history. We thought that would be enough capital to get us to, $1.5 billion in assets or so in terms of our balance sheet size. That's about right, but I would tell you that in retrospect, you can't have enough capital. We can take a lot more risk with more capital. And taking risk is the way we build our business. Again, this is a business of calculated risk taking. You have to be very careful, but you have to be very smart in the way you do it to build the business. And so, in my view, that minimum critical mass is probably, to have capital of $200 to $300 million, so maybe twice what we've got now, and we can build a company that's 3 to 4 times our size with that kind of capital. And I would like to get there over, say, the next 5 years. And I think we have a great chance of doing that. So, good question. Yes, ma'am.
How are you all tracking feedback from your clients as to ensure that they are satisfied?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. And one of the things I referred to, one of the if you look at the spectrum of competitors in the banking industry, the companies that seem to do best in terms of customer service are the smaller companies that can be close to their clients. They get feedback. They can deliver their services in a very tailored fashion. The very large organizations don't get very good customer service scores. If you look at Gallup and all these organizations that do this kind of research. because they're so impersonal, and they have to be focused on standardization and uniformity of delivery and so forth. So we get feedback in a couple ways. One is every time we do something for our clients, they tell us whether or not they like the way we do it. We have about 250 corporate clients, and we do business with about 400 households. So we have a relatively small client base. We do big things for them. We make, to these commercial clients, these 250 commercial clients, we make loans of at least $1 million, typically, often as high as $15 million. So, we're very important to them. We're sort of their lifeblood. Typically their only bank. The households that we do business with, we typically are their only bank. So every time we do something for them, we get feedback, and we do it in a very personal way. We deliver the service one-on-one, and so we get sort of immediate feedback in terms of whether we've satisfied their need. The other thing we do is we do participate in some market research surveys, and that research tells us that we have a good reputation, that we're delivering high-quality service, and that our people are differentiated in the market from their competitors. So good feedback so far, but it's, getting that feedback is critically important if you're really listening, and we've got to listen to do well. Yes, sir.
When you and your investors, partners, realized that you were trying to start a bank during one of the largest economic turndowns in U.S. history, what was the big change you had to make to your business plan?
Well, fundamentally, the business plan didn't change. We wanted to continue to do business with the same segments of the market, same segment of clients that we had originally set out to do. We always had in mind that we were going to operate the business in a very sound and conservative kind of way. That's what good bankers do. But we did have to make some adjustments, and the adjustments were in the pace at which we thought we would grow. In the fall of 2006, when we did our initial business planning, we thought by the end of year 3 we would be $1 billion. Well, we were $800 million by the end of year 3. So we dialed back the pace of growth a little bit. We realized that the pool of potential borrowers that we wanted to address was going to be smaller, so we had to be more selective. That wasn't a matter of being more conservative or anything with respect to our lending policy, but it's just realizing that there was a smaller pool of qualified borrowers because a lot of companies are under stress in this economic environment. Another key thing we did is we wanted to keep more cash and other types of liquidity, principally marketable securities, on our balance sheet, because we wanted to be able to suffer through any, large deposit withdrawals or anything like that. We wanted to have the ability to lend money. So we have kept a lot more cash and securities on our balance sheet relative to loans in the process. Today, probably, we have a $850 to $900 million balance sheet today, and we have about $150 million of cash and marketable securities. So we have a good bit of liquidity to a $650 million loan portfolio. So, it's not the most efficient balance sheet that you might want to have, but it's appropriate given where we are in the economic environment. So.
Okay, I think that's probably going to be the last question. How about another round for the speaker? On behalf of all the students here and the faculty and staff, just want to thank you for coming out.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
But we appreciate you coming out.
Thank you very much.
And just to kind of add a little bit, I hope you realize that there's nothing to stop you, right? There's nothing to stop you. Your degree is going to prepare you to be the next Doug Williams. Or whoever else for that matter.
I'll let you choose your role model, but one thing I would say, and your dean is right on target. When I was thinking about doing this, I was talking to a friend of mine that's a real estate entrepreneur, and I was saying, other people have done this, and I think I'm just as smart as they are, and that sort of thing. He said, that's not the key. He said, it's the willingness to take the initiative and do it, and that's really what it's all about. So let me encourage you to think about that.
Okay, great. Thank you.